Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. I got an excellent question from a colleague after my last video, which was about when successful clients relapse. And that was, what about triggers? And what about secondary gain? So I thought that was such a good and relevant question that I decided to make a video on it. So I used to think in terms of triggers and secondary gains. I no longer really do. And the fact that I made a video about relapses without mentioning those things at all really kind of showed to me how far away my current thinking is from the way I used to think, previously. So most people have this notion that our internal experience are triggered by something external. So that our experience are triggered by so-called events or a so-called past event, or that it's triggered by some sort of object, whether it's the elevator doors closing or turbulence on a flight or something like that. What I've discovered is that there is no such thing as a trigger. There is no such thing as a trigger. They quite literally don't. They're psychological illusions. What people call a trigger is just another thought. So what people call a trigger is just another thought. It looks as if that the elevator doors closing triggers a fear response. But the perception of elevator doors closing is a thought. The feeling response is a thought. So what you call a trigger is just another thought. The perception of the audience in front of you that looks to be triggering the internal experience that you call stage fright is just another thought. Now, one thought does not control or create another thought. One thought does not control or create another thought. It's just another thought in the thought stream. So both the perception labeled an audience and the internal experience that you label stage fright are both appearances, both thought constructs in consciousness. It's not that one creates the other or that one really follows the other. It just kind of looks like that when what we call a trigger isn't quite seen to be a thought. So one of the best things you can do with your clients is to help them to make the discovery that what they called a trigger is just another thought. Now, let's say that the elevator door closes and the client has what they call a fear response. It looks as if the fact that an object closes, the elevator doors closes, it looks as if that perception has an innate or embedded command to have a particular internal experience that follows it. Whereas if the perception of a beer can has a kind of innate or mandatory, urge response following in the physiology, or the sight of an audience, that perception in of itself contains a command or a mandatory experience to have, for example, a beating heart and sweaty palms. But the idea that that perception commands the next perception, the idea that that perception kind of mandates some mandatory response to follow is in and of itself a thought. and it has no existence separate from the thought that thinks it up. Now, at the level of experience, both what you call the sight of the audience and the beating heart, the perception of the elevator doors closing and the sweaty palms, these aren't occurring in two different places. They're all taking place in consciousness as modulations of consciousness. At the level of experience, there's no inside and outside. Inside and outside is also, that distinction is also created by the thought that thinks it up. At the level of experience, there's just a stream of experience. Now, more conventionally, here's also something very interesting to see. It can't be that the sight of the audience triggers a particular response in you, because the sight of the audience is the end result of the thought process. The feelings response you have is the end result of the thought process. That which has already been created does not have the power to create. I'll say it again. That which has already been created, the end result of the process, does not have the power to create. It's already done. So this idea of triggers is a massive misunderstanding. Now, more conventionally, you could make the case that there are certain environmental, triggers per se that mandate a particular response, but they're very few and very far between. So you could acknowledge that, for example, if we were to make a movie, a horror movie, we would not, make the horror movie in broad daylight on a beach in open space with kind of Hawaiian music in the background. We would use the dark and enclosed places and sudden sounds. That would be an environment that would be more likely to kind of evoke a fear response. But still, even with that particular environment, a fear response is not mandatory. Now, there are some things that kind of seem mandatory. For example, the startle flinch response, with high, sudden, dramatic sounds. Of course, the sound is also the end result of a thought process, right? But it does seem as if a sudden, loud noise or sound kind of creates a startle flinch response. You can make that case. I haven't been able to change that response in myself, for example. But there are very experienced meditators who have been able to override that response. You can read about this in Daniel Goleman's book, Destructive Emotions, which is a really, really interesting read. Now, in terms of secondary gains, I think it's a valid concept that people perceive that they get particular gains out of having particular experiences. Might be very practical, like a welfare check, or attention, or not having to do certain things, or to be able to set boundaries by having a symptom say no instead of directly saying no. These are all accurate enough. Simultaneously, the whole notion of secondary gain also emerges from the same psychological illusion as the concept of a trigger. It's kind of the result of not seeing that certain thoughts are indeed thoughts, right? So if I don't quite see that my experience is a thought construct in consciousness, then it's always going to look as if I am experiencing so-called events and objects and people that are making me feel and triggering me in a particular way. So now life very easily becomes about control. I may spend a lot of time trying to control my partner, for example, and criticize and blame and nag and complain and threaten and bribe, or I may spend a lot of time trying to live up to what I perceive to be other people's expectations of me, under the guise of, if I only can become perfect, then I will get approval and then I will be safe, right? So you could say that secondary gain of not being able to do public speaking, for example, is that I don't risk getting rejected, for example, or by having a headache, I never have to say no to certain things directly, so I don't get to rock the relationship, or by having chronic back pain or chronic migraines, I get to not experience particular emotions, right? But as Dr. John Sarno has demonstrated clearly in terms of psychosomatically generated pain, most chronic pain is generated by psychological factors, by the brain. So helping people understand the magic trick involved, helping people to see the mechanism, very often makes what was perceived to be the secondary gain kind of irrelevant. Or if I suddenly see that my experience is not created by so-called objects or other people or events per se, I'm going to be way less likely to constantly try to control other people or events, or try to live up to other people's expectations to get approval, just because I realize that that's not how experience works. That's not really how my experience is generated. So if you look at secondary gains, there are usually three categories that that symptoms seem to fall into in terms of function. First one is to not have to feel something else. So we generate migraines, chronic back pain, all sorts of psychosomatic symptoms. It's a way for the brain to fixate the attention on the physical body so that we don't have to feel some emotions that we often unconsciously have deemed threatening or unacceptable. So we don't even know that we're feeling it. We just have this pain, right? Now, as long as some internal experiences look dangerous for us, it looks as if the brain is doing us a favor by generating all this chronic pain. But by getting a deeper understanding into the illusory nature of experience, there's less of a perceived need to mask our internal experiences with either pain or what we call addictions. So that's one category. The other category seems to be about controlling other people. So I may be using my angering, or my fears or my depression to control other people, to punish other people, and to set boundaries without risking, rejection, or to just abdicate responsibility, for my own life. And as long as it looks as if my experience, again, is triggered by so-called external events, then these sorts of things make sense. But the more I begin to see the illusory nature of my own experience, and that it's all created by a thought construct inside of me, the less there's going to be a perceived need to generate symptoms to control other people in that way. And the final one is very often to, again, let's say you have someone who's really depressed and you try to get them to be social or to apply for a new job or to, meet a new partner, and they say, I know I should, but I'm just too depressed right now. What they're often kind of saying is that, look, I can handle the present level of frustration, but if I were to get rejected again, or if that were to happen again, the level of frustration that would emerge from that is just too much for me to handle. So very often we depress or we generate symptoms to kind of protect ourselves, to some extent. But again, the more you see the illusory nature of your experience, the less whatever you experience is going to look threatening and look as if something you need to be protected or distracted from. So I know that this is a quite different way of thinking for many of you. Again, we could talk about competing commitments, like if you look at how difficult it is for many people to admit to mistakes, how important it is for them to protect their facade or to have power, or prestige, or these sorts of things. I'm not saying that these things can't be useful to have a perception of, but they're mostly rooted in the exact psychological illusion that I'm trying my best to get my clients to see through. Anyway, so hope this was useful. If this way of thinking resonates, know that I do see clients on Skype from all over the world. I do seminars, I do mentoring. So if this interests, feel free to go to provocativehypnosis.com and get in touch with me from there. Okay, till next time. Thanks.